Section 3, Introduction to Sampling. A population consists of all members of a group in which the researcher has an interest. Populations may be large, such as all nurses in a state. If we are interested in the attitudes of all registered nurses in Texas and we administer a scale, the nurses we would be studying, or the population, the results, such as an average, would be referred to as the parameters. A sample is a subset of a population. If we only study a sample of the nurses from a state and collect survey data, the averages of survey results are referred to as statistics. Here is an easy way on how to remember what populations and samples yield. Populations yield parameters. Samples yield statistics. No matter how a sample is drawn, there can always be statistics obtained by studying the sample that do not accurately reflect the population parameters that would have been obtained if the entire population had been surveyed. Researchers almost always expect some error as a result of sampling. Sampling creates errors. So why do researchers sample? For economic and physical reasons, it is not always possible to study an entire population. So think about what some of the reasons might be. One of the main reasons it would be difficult to study an entire population might be cost. Another might be time. Also, with proper sampling, highly reliable results can be obtained. And with proper sampling, the amount of error to allow for an interpretation of resulting data can be estimated with inferential statistics. The most important characteristic of a good sample is freedom from bias. Bias exists. Freedom from bias is the most important characteristic. So here we see that everyone wants to be chosen. Pick me, pick me. Why should you pick me? Pick me. The problem is that unbiased samples need to be collected. All individuals in a population need to have an equal chance of being included as a participant. So there can be no favorites. So here is an example of a biased sample. Using an example from the textbook, a professor wishes to study the attitudes of all sophomores at a college. Well, this is your population. Or ask only those enrolled in her intro psych class. Well, that would be your sample to participate. Note that only those in the class have a chance of being selected. Other sophomores in the college within the population have no chance of being included. In the previous example, a sample of convenience or an accidental sample was used, which increases the odds that some members of the population will be selected, while reducing the odds that other members would be selected. Additionally, some of those who may have a chance of being included may decide not to participate in the research. Remember, samples of convenience are biased. Self-selection bias, also known as volunteerism, creates an additional source of bias because those who decide not to participate have no chance of being included. Volunteerism in sampling is presumed to create bias. Many studies compare participants, volunteers, with non-participants and suggest that participants tend to be more educated and come from higher socioeconomic groups. Some efforts to reduce volunteerism include offering rewards or making it easier to respond, such as giving the participant a self-addressed stamped envelope. If we are selecting a simple random sample from this population, we could end up not having a representative sample. Remember, back at the beginning of our lectures, we talked about sampling errors. One of the errors is that you could end up with a large number of one part of the population, making the sample unrepresentative and lead to incorrect results. An unbiased sample obtained by a researcher would be when a researcher used random sampling and everyone agrees to participate. Can researchers be certain that results obtained for the sample accurately reflect those results that would have been obtained by studying the entire population? Certainly not. Random errors created by random selection are called sampling errors by statisticians. There is still a possibility sampling errors will exist. But how can errors still exist? Well, the researcher may have selected a disproportionately large number of Democrats, of males, of dropouts, of old people, or of college students. A sampling error could then make the sample unrepresentative and may lead to incorrect results. Can we correct for the errors? Well, sort of. We can estimate the amount of error in unbiased samples via inferential statistics. We can also use larger samples, so the amount of sampling error is smaller. While using large samples helps to eliminate the amount of random error, it is important to note that selecting a large sample does not correct for errors due to bias. For example, if you're trying to predict the results of a citywide election, and an individual or researcher is very persistent, spending weeks at a shopping mall asking shoppers how they plan to vote, the researcher will get a large sample of people who may differ from the population of voters. If we think about persons who spend more time at a shopping mall, they may be more affluent. They may have more time to shop. So increasing the size of the bias sample does not reduce the amount of error due to bias. Statistical results based on observations of biased samples should be viewed with great caution. It is important to note that the statistical remedies for errors due to biased samples are limited because researchers usually do not know the extent to which a particular bias has affected their results. It is generally not possible to adjust statistically for errors created by bias. Thus, when bias samples are used, the results of statistical analysis of the data should be viewed with great caution. We will later discuss various methods of random sampling and consideration in determining sample size. You should now complete Section 3 questions from your text.